Good afternoon, fellow human beings. Welcome, welcome. All right. Good to see you all here. We'll wait for 2 more minutes for the rest to join, and then we will get started. If you already have any questions about the content, about the whole bachelor for that matter, you can already ask it in the chat. Just as a check for the people that are already here, Emma, can you hear me well? Can you say yes in the chat to check if my audio is good? Perfect. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Well, we will wait for 2 more minutes. And today we're going to be discussing some important stuff. So good that you're here. Happy to see you all. And like I said, if you have any questions, you can already ask. I will already show you this. I think this is more interesting than the starting page. So this is the exam analysis. So you can see what topic is how important for the exam. And then we will wait for 2 more minutes. I'm also going to be discussing today some exam questions with you, and sometimes they're quite literally how you get them on the exam. So I would really advise you to pay attention to those, because if you remember the question, if you remember the answer, that's just going to earn you some extra points for the exam. For experimental psychology, they recycle the exams a lot. So there's not a lot of change over the years, and sometimes the questions are literally identical. On which year is the exam analysis based? It's based on all the exams since 2012. So it's been now 24 exams because we have the regular exam and the resit. And out of all these 24, you see that some questions were asked in the beginning, but they leave them out at some point. Some questions come back every year, and that way we know what's important and what isn't. Yeah. All right, 3 o'clock. Let's get started. Well, good to see you all. Also for the people that just came in, can you hear me well? Can you say yes in the chat if you can hear me? I mean, I'll if I can also ask like, can you say no if you can't hear me? But that doesn't work like that because then you can't hear the question, obviously. All right. Okay. Out of my own curiosity, before we get started, where are you guys from? Can you say your nationality in the chat? Because it kind of changes every year, which is cool to see. Turkey, Greece, Slovenia, Dutch. Nice. I also did the English track as a Dutchie. Cool. Like when I started my bachelor's, I also did the English track. It was only Germans and four Dutch people, but now we see that it's becoming more of a mix, which I think is interesting. Venezuela, okay, nice. Okay, all right, cool. Well, hi Patrick. I'm not going to talk about myself too much. That's not why you're here. But I also studied psychology, also at Tilburg University, and I also did the international track. I changed after 1 year. I started on the Dutch track, but then I felt like, well, all the Dutch people that are in the Dutch track, they decided to stay home for 3 years. There's nothing wrong with staying home, but I felt, all the internationals, they made a choice to live abroad for 3 years. And I thought, well, I think if I have to choose which people to surround myself with, I would rather do that with people that choose to go out of their comfort zone. So yeah, that was the reason, and I really enjoyed that. Before I continue, I already see some people putting the camera on. That's much appreciated. And I want to ask you all, can you put your camera on? Because that way I can see if you guys get it or not. I can determine the pace. We might have some more time for extra exam questions. I will give you a minute to do that. Much appreciated. Thank you so much. And that way I can also see if my jokes land. That's the most important thing. If you think I'm funny and if I just shut up and do my job. Well, a lot of hours of teaching. I've been teaching this course since 2016, so a long time. You wouldn't say so because my facial hair doesn't really work, but I'm 29, so I've been doing this for a long time. And little fun thing about me is that I lived in Africa for 2.5 years in total, Tanzania, mostly in South Africa. So also, if you have any questions about your bachelor, be it about experimental psychology or going on exchange or the honors program, always feel free to text me, okay? I'll send my number also a couple times during this training, but that's me. This is the chat for experimental psychology, but I will show that to you in the break so that you can join that and ask your questions specifically about experimental psychology over there if you want to. Some people find that more comfortable than in the big group chat, so that's why. What we are going to do today is we're going to be discussing the theory of a very important chapter. I'm going to tell you some examples. Some examples are a bit dark. The reason that I do that is because I feel that's the best way to remember it. It's not per se because I'm a dark, cynical person, I believe, but it's just more effective. And I'm going to show you exam questions. And those are very important because for experimental psychology, the questions don't change a lot. And some questions come back literally the same every year. They are a little bit lazy in recycling questions. That is what we use. That is what we're going to show you. That's also sometimes why the university doesn't like us as much because people tend to not show up at the lectures anymore. But then again, our incentive is to make sure that most people pass. Yeah, then they should just change the questions. That's how I feel. You have 50 multiple choice questions in your exam, A, B, C, D. Usually one of them is clearly wrong, so you can immediately eliminate one of them. Two, like a second answer possibility seems correct, but if you look a little bit harder, you see that it's wrong. So that's a matter of reading. And then the remaining two possibilities look quite similar. Experimental psychology is quite tricky in that. So I'm going to also show you some exam questions to show you the amount of detail that you need to know. And unfortunately, that's quite a bit. Um, your exam, you have 2 hours, which I don't get, to be honest, because you are the first year that has 2 hours. It used to be 3 hours. And the exam is still as long. It used to be, well, it's always been 50 questions. So I think it's a matter of just not being able to find surveying people, I guess. I don't get why, because I felt that a lot of people need those 3 hours. But that's reality. Let's deal with reality. Um, Work in 2 rounds. That's my advice to tackle this. Work with an easy round. So you go through your exam, all the questions that you know, you fill in the answer. Questions that you find difficult, make a little mark, work all the way till the end, and then you do the difficult round. So then you're going to look at all the questions that you find tricky. And one reason that we do that is because, well, as you can see here, these questions about the eye, about the ear, they are going to be quite tricky, as well as chapters of questions about learning. So if you stay too long here, then you're going to miss questions about emotion and motivation, and they are relatively easy. So make sure to fully make the exam. Your exam is in chronological order. So they're not going to first ask you about chapter 10 and then chapter 2 and then chapter 4 and then chapter 7, chronological order, but make your whole exam and then come back to the difficult questions, okay? Ends on the 17th of October. Before I continue, is this clear for everybody? Can I see a yes or no in the chat? If I see enough yeses, I will continue. I will do this quite often, by the way, and I want to ask you to participate in that because that way, like I said, I can determine the pace. And I also included a lot of extra material, so if we are done earlier, then I can show you even more exam questions. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And then this question for you once again, does this seem familiar? Can you say yes or no in the chat? Some familiarity with this. Okay, that's good. That's the basis, eh? That you at least recognize it. Good. And you don't have to answer this question right away, but do you think you would be at this point able to answer this exam question? Can you say yes or no in the chat? So you can be honest. Yeah, a little bit of a mix. This is a typical exam question. So we're going to be discussing this today. If you can't answer it yet, no problem. That's why we're here. And we're going to be discussing quite some exam questions today. Okay? Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning. Then I'm going to give you some info, exam questions, and tips for the exam, general advice. We're going to start off with learning in itself. And the definition of learning, whenever I see a definition, my first question is, do I really have to know this? Everything I'm going to show you today is important for your exam. Otherwise, I would have left it out. Okay? So I'm going to be following a little bit of a different structure than the lecturer because my goal is not to teach you everything. My goal is to make sure that you pass your exam. So everything I'm going to be discussing is going to be important for your exam. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of experience. So, what can you expect on the exam? That they will give you some definitions and you have to pick the right one. And I made a mistake because they said, what's the best definition for learning? And I picked the answer. Learning is a change in behavior as a result of experience. Wrong. I went to the exam inspection and they told me, no, it's a relatively permanent change. What do they mean with this? Well, I can learn that the capital of Slovakia is Bratislava, for example. So then I learn something. But let's say I get dementia or I come into a motorcycle accident and I lose half my brain, then it can be that I unlearn it again, that I forget it. So it's not a change, it's a relatively permanent change. That word relatively is very important. So make sure not to miss that. Okay. Three types of learning that we're going to be looking at: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Those are the three ones. And then I'm going to ask Alma, if I pronounce it correctly, could you unmute yourself and tell me what you remember about Pavlov? If that rings a bell. Okay, okay. Well, then I'm going to ask Maya. Can you maybe unmute yourself? Maya Brodowska, if I pronounce it correctly. Could you unmute yourself, like with your microphone, and tell us what you, if you know anything about Pavlov? Okay, all right. It might have something to do with my audio. I couldn't I couldn't hear you, but I didn't want to interrupt you. But it's no problem. I will just tell you. Pavlov is, and I think that is what I got out of your lip reading, the man behind classical conditioning. So he is the man about learning by association. That is what Pavlov is all about. So we have classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning. It could be that in your exam, they're going to give you an example and they're going to ask you, is this classical conditioning or operant? And sometimes it can be difficult because they're quite alike. If it's about classical conditioning, they're going to create an emphasis on a connection. Classical connection, CC. So they're going to be talking about making a new connection. Operant conditioning is about punishment and reward. So that's the big difference. So a little bit more about classical conditioning. This is Pavlov. Uh, Great facial hair, great mustache, have to admit. And classical conditioning, the classical experiment was with the dog, as you can probably remember. In your exam, it could be that they're going to show you a picture like this and that you have to fill in, like, okay, is the bell here a neutral stimulus or an unconditioned stimulus or whatever? So that you have to fill one of these in. I'm going to walk you through it. At first, there has been no conditioning yet. We are starting with an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. It's unconditioned because we haven't started yet. Okay, unconditioned. So the dog starts producing saliva if it sees the food. Nothing special yet. Now I'm going to show the dog a bell. Well, the dog, as you can see on the facial expression, as you will also see that in the exam, is rather neutral. It doesn't really care about the bell. So it's a neutral response on a neutral stimulus. Well, Then what I'm going to do, and this is obviously the thing what classical conditioning is all about, I'm going to create a connection, classical conditioning connection, CC. So I'm going to show the dog the food, still an unconditioned stimulus, I just started, and still an unconditioned response. The dog only has eye for the food. And at the same time, I show the neutral stimulus, the bell. If I do this often enough, the bell together with the food, the dog is going to create a connection. And then when I ring the bell, it already starts producing saliva because it has a connection with the food. Then, and only then, we speak about a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned response. Okay? In your exam, an easy way to remember this is that this is all unconditioned, this is all neutral, and this is all conditioned. That might seem logical, right? We go from unconditioned to neutral to conditioned. So we go like this. The thing they ask most often, however, is the third image. Best way to remember that one is that the third image is just the first and the second image together. See? The food still unconditioned, the response still unconditioned, and the bell still neutral. So number 3 is 1 and 2 together. 1 plus 2 is 3. Is this clear for everybody? Can you see a yes or no in the chat? Okay. It's not the most tricky part per se, but what happens in quite some exams is that they're going to show you a picture like this, and then you have to know neutral, unconditioned, unconditioned, and then in the exam inspection, some people say, but how do you know if this is the first time that I do this or the 1,000th time? Because if I've done this 1,000 times, then it's not neutral anymore, then it's already conditioned. And then the answer that the professor gave was, well, you just have to know that. You have to know it based on the image that I'm just starting the conditioning here. So that's why I specifically point this out, because, well, I felt you couldn't know this unless you hear it once. Okay. Later, we're also going to practice with this once more, because then if you get it out of your mind, active learning, then you are all good. The term acquisition is a term you have to know. And this means to acquire an effect, so that you get an effect that the dog starts producing saliva when he hears the bell. And in your exam, it can be as simple as that they ask you, well, getting an effect that the dog starts producing saliva, how do we call this? And then you have to be able to tell out of 4 terms that it's acquisition. Okay? To acquire an effect. If they're going to ask you a question about, is it now, how fast do you acquire a certain effect? And then they have answer possibilities like 2 hours, 3 weeks, 2 months. And then one answer possibility is always something like, it depends on the situation. And the boring but correct answer is, it depends on the situation. Because if I get bitten by a dog, let's say I get bitten by a German Shepherd, I don't have to be bit like 40 times before I are conditioned to become afraid of dogs. It can happen in one go. So it can go very quick, as with the trauma. It can also be that it takes a very long time. If I have a very stubborn dog, or if the dog just doesn't like the food, then it takes a long time. So in the case of such a question, always go for the nuanced answer, okay? And the same goes for the term extinction. Extinction, to get extinct, is when an effect disappears again. This also really depends on the situation. If it takes a week, if it takes a month, if it takes a year, it depends. The concept of extinction, well, basically works like this. If I have the dog conditioned, as in this image, if I then show the bell to a dog 100 times in a row without presenting food, at some point the dog is going to get bored again. It's going to go from this conditioned back to neutral. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to get any food anyway. Last 100 times you didn't give any food. So, well, that is called extinction. An important nuance that you have to know for your exam is the nuance of spontaneous recovery. And this means that, well, the dog is bored with my bell, but once I show the bell and the food again for only one more time, the dog immediately is conditioned again. the effect is spontaneously recovered. In other words, it's not that the dog completely forgot the effect existed. Because once I show it once more, bell and food together, the dog is like, oh yeah, bell food, bell food. There was a connection there. And it's immediately conditioned again. And this we call spontaneous recovery. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see a yes or no in the chat? Okay. If you have any questions, you can always let me know. And I will also in the break, we're gonna have a break at some point. You can ask questions after class. You can ask questions. You can send me a WhatsApp. It's all good. I see a question, an unrelated question. What is the ratio of definitions versus names of pioneers in the exam? For experimental psychology, I assume you mean specifically. Um, the ratio I wouldn't know out of the top of my head. The names you have to know quite a bit. Not as much as for intro history to psychology, obviously, because that's all about the pioneers. But for experimental psychology, also quite a few. Like Skinner, you have to know. Freud, you have to know. Watson, the Gestalt psychologists, you have to know. Wundt. So there are quite a few. Yeah. And definitions also. Experimental psychology is quite detailed. Yeah. Good question. Okay. We're going to be looking at stimulus generalization and discrimination. Generalization, let's go back at the example. Like, let's say the German Shepherd bites me. Okay? Well, the thing is with when it bites me with a phobia, for example, is that I'm not just afraid of that one German Shepherd, right? I become afraid of all dogs. I generalize my fear to all dogs. And this is what we call stimulus generalization. I generalize it. Discrimination, on the other hand, you're probably familiar with the word, but discrimination is the other way around. And this you specifically have to know in discrimination training. What does this mean? Let's say I'm afraid of, well, all dogs, right? I just got bitten. I'm afraid of all dogs because I got bitten by a German Shepherd. Now they put me in a room and they're going to show me a very small dog. Okay. At first, I'm going to be like, oh shit, that's a dog. I'm going to be afraid. But once I spend longer with that small dog, I notice, hey, that small dog isn't so bad. Okay, maybe I'm not afraid of all dogs, maybe just big dogs. And I kind of learn to differentiate, learn to discriminate in my fear. Well, they throw out the small dog, they put in a golden retriever, big dog. I'm afraid because I'm afraid of big dogs. But then the longer I spend with a dog, I feel like, oh, but this is actually not that bad. Okay, maybe I'm not afraid of all big dogs, maybe just German Shepherds. And this is what we call discrimination training. We learn to discriminate within our fear. And throughout your whole bachelor, what is very important to realize is that anything that's applicable in your therapy that you're actually going to use when you're a psychologist is generally more important for the exam. I think that's something good that Tilburg University does. Discrimination training, they actually use it for phobias, so the chance is bigger that they're going to ask it to you. I see a question. We didn't cover these definitions in the slides, and the lecturer said that only things that are on the slides are free game during the exam, and the content of the book he specified. So how is it that we need to know those? Well, the thing you have to understand about experimental psychology is that, because this question I get almost every year, is that the content is quite specific. So the Dutch lecturer says the same thing. Things that are on the slides are an indication of how important it is for the exam. But it doesn't mean that it's only about the slides. Because if it, for example, says the eye, let's take a silly example. If it talks about ganglion cells on the slides, that just specifically means that that topic is important. And you have to know the broader context of that topic. So I would really advise you to, if a topic is really represented in the slides a lot, you know it's going to be important, to then also focus on the content around it and not just on the one thing that's on the slides. Okay? That's generally what you see on the exams. Yeah, but good question. Okay. Let's take a minute and see for yourself if you're able to answer the following question, to fill in for each of the images if we're talking about a neutral stimulus, a neutral response, a conditioned stimulus, a conditioned response, or an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response. I will put the possibilities in the chat. And once you're done, you can just say yes in the chat. You don't have to send the answer. And if I see enough yeses, I'm going to be discussing it. Okay? The question is to fill in for each of the images, like, are we talking about a neutral response here or a neutral stimulus, to kind of fill this in. So what should be standing here? What should be written here, 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 here. Okay? No worries. Okay. See quite some yeses. I just do it like this so that you also have to get it out of your memory, obviously. Okay. I'm going to be discussing it. I see enough yeses. And like I said, if you find this difficult, you can always ask me questions in the break, after class, through WhatsApp. That's all good. So, what is the easiest way to tackle this? Remember, we go from unconditioned to neutral to conditioned. So these three you can already fill in. Everything is unconditioned, everything is neutral, and everything is conditioned. Okay? Then the only question that remains is how do we do image 3? Like I said, number 3 is number 1 and number 2 together. That makes 3. So unconditioned stimulus, still. Unconditioned response, still. And a neutral stimulus, still. In your exam, obviously it's multiple choice. So they're not going to ask you fill in everything. What they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, this bell, what is this? A, B, C, D. Unconditioned stimulus, neutral stimulus, conditioned stimulus, neutral response, something like that. And then you have to be able to fill it in. Okay? Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? And I asked the questions on purpose a little bit more open so that you're able to fill them all in. But in your exam, it's going to be more specific. Good. All right. So that's the most important thing you have to know about classical conditioning. Then we're going to continue with operant conditioning. And operant conditioning out of these three is the most important one. So this is the one that's most important for your exam. Okay. Classical conditioning is about creating a connection. Operant conditioning about punishment and reward. So if they're going to show you an abstract example and they're going to ask you, is this classical or operant? It's really about where the emphasis is on. Because if I take this example, I can tell you, okay, I want to create a connection between food and a bell. Then you have to know, talking about classical conditioning. But I can also tell you, well, I want the dog to feel rewarded, so I'm going to give it food every single time he hears a bell. Now the emphasis is on a reward, then I'm talking about operant conditioning, okay? So that's quite tricky, but it's really about where is the focus on. I'm going to talk about operant conditioning. Operant conditioning are changes due to punishment and reward. So that's just what we saw. Classical conditioning about creating a connection. Operant conditioning is really about punishment and reward. Operant conditioning also has some connection with behaviorism, as you might see. It's really about the outcome. And like I said, everything that's relevant for psychologists nowadays is more important for your exam generally. So we love behaviorism. Everything has to be measurable. We stepped away from Freud and his theories that he wants to bang his mom to move towards operant conditioning and behaviorism. So this is important. You have to know the law of effect, and you have to know it's from Thorndike. So to relate back to the question I got, what kind of pioneers you have to know? All the names I mentioned today, you have to know. The names are left out. You don't have to know for this chapter. But Thorndike, definitely. And Thorndike came up with the law of effect. Now, the law in itself is not that difficult. Well, I'm going to show you a little example. As a kid, until a very late age, embarrassingly late, I was not able to tie my own shoelaces. And the reason for this was that in my class there were girls, and if I would ask them if they could do it for me, they would do it for me. And as a 10-year-old boy, that's the only kind of female attention I got. So I never felt a motivation to learn to tie my own shoelaces. And then at some point, my parents were like, okay, now he's going to high school. Maybe we should, make sure that he doesn't immediately get bullied. So actually teach him how to tie his own shoelaces. So they said every single time you tie your shoelaces, you get €1. So what did I do? In my room, I practiced tying my shoelaces as often as I could. I ran downstairs, and then I would do it like 7 times in a row, very quickly, tie my shoelaces and untie, tie, untie, tie, untie. And then I got €7. And then at some point, my parents said, "Okay, the deal is over." I thought I found like a new 9 to 5 job that I could do this forever, but apparently not. And that's exactly what the law of effect implies. Behavior, tying my own shoelaces, with positive consequences, getting money, is repeated more quickly and efficiently. Like I said, it's not that difficult, but sometimes what people do, including me, is that if something sounds logical, you are like, oh, I understand this, and you skip it. But that's tricky because in your exam, if they ask about the law of effect, they will give you quite some answer possibilities that sound logical. They really want to differentiate between people that really know their stuff and people that just think logical. Okay. So it could be, for example, that they say, what does the law of effect entail? And then this is one answer possibility, but it could also be that they say uh, that causality is more important than correlation. Well, if you haven't paid attention, that does sound logical. Effect, causality, well, that's just simply not true. You have to notice. Okay, then we're going to continue with operant conditioning a little bit further. If they ask you a question about who is the guy who created the underlying law of operant conditioning, that's Thorndike. That's the man we just saw. If they're going to ask you who became famous for operant conditioning or who further developed operant conditioning, that's Skinner. This man on his forehead, he became famous with it. He worked further with it. Another name that you could answer there is Watson. Skinner and Watson both, but Skinner a little bit more. Okay. They're not going to ask you to differentiate between those two because they both are famous for operant conditioning and for behaviorism for that matter. So Skinner said we have something called an operant response. So for example, tying my shoelaces. And I tie my shoelaces because of something in the environment, getting money. Is that what we mean with an operant response? Okay. A reward, like we said, operant conditioning is about rewards and punishments. And we're first going to look at rewards. A different word for reward is reinforcement. You have to know both words because they're going to use it interchangeably in your exam. I'm going to use the word reinforcement because I can imagine you already know the word reward so that you remember the word reinforcement. Okay. We have positive and negative reinforcement. And you have to know the difference. Positive is about applying, and negative is about taking something away. And this is important because, well, a reinforcement, so a reward, is always something nice. So a negative reinforcement is still nice. It's still a reinforcement. This is an important distinction to understand because we're going to see the same thing with punishment. Example, positive reinforcement. Positive, I apply. Reinforcement, it's nice. So I give you money. I apply something and it's nice. Money. Negative reinforcement. Negative is about taking something away. And reinforcement, it should be nice that I take it away. So what's an example of that? Let's say that my parents would have taken a different approach and that my mom would constantly scream in my ear. And once I tie my own shoelaces, she would stop the screaming. That's a negative because something is being taken away, but it's a reward. The fact that she stops screaming, that's nice. So it is a reward. So in your exam, what they're going to do is they're going to show you an example, and then they're going to ask you, is this positive, negative, reward, punishment? And then you first look, am I applying something or taking something away? Positive, negative. Is this nice? Reward. If it's not nice, punishment. Okay. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? Okay. Right. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay. And then we're going to look at the difference between primary and secondary reinforcement. And the main difference is that you have to remember, that's an easy way to remember it. Primary is primitive, is primal. What do I mean with that? If they're going to ask you, they're going to give you an example. They're going to ask you, is this primary or secondary? You have to think for yourself, is this primal, primitive? In other words, can I condition an animal with this? Can I reward an animal? Food? Yes, it's primitive, so it's primal. You can reward an animal with food. Water? Yes. Attention? Yes. Space? Let's say you put a dog in a very small cage and you want to teach it that it should press a button to get out. Yeah. Yeah, a dog will want to get out. That's primitive. Money? No. Money is secondary. It's not primitive. You can't condition a dog with money. It doesn't know its value. That's learned. So the best way, if they give you any example, is to think, can I reward an animal with it? Is it primitive? Yes, primitive is primary. Primitive, primary, primitive, primary. If not, secondary. Okay. Then we're going to look at continuous versus partial slash intermediating slash variable reinforcement. Big words. Kind of all means the same thing. You have to know what it means and you have to know what is the most effective. And I'm going to start off with explaining to you what they mean with continuous rewards. Continuous, consistent. That's an easy way to remember it. So in other words, if I go to a vending machine and if I throw in €1, I get 1 can of Coke back. If I throw in another euro, I get 1 can of Coke back. It's continuous, consistent. It's not that I sometimes get no Coke and sometimes 40. No, it's always the same reward for the same behavior. Partial, intermediating, intermittent, or variable, all the same thing, means the other side. So that is partial in parts. So now it's not consistent anymore. This is, for example, with the slot machine. A couple months ago, I went with my friends to Las Vegas. Well, it's not that you every single time get the same reward. Sometimes you get nothing. Sometimes you get $1, sometimes $40. Sometimes you jackpot, get nothing again. So this is a partial or intermediating reinforcement. We're going to dive deeper into it, what is more effective. But before we do this, is this difference clear for everybody? Can I see a yes or no in the chat? Okay. What they like to ask you, which makes kind of sense, is they like, because it's A, B, C, D, right? You have four options. So questions that are very easily turned into four option questions, they like. So positive punishment, negative punishment, positive reward, negative reward. Always four options. They like to do that. Same goes for the question, what is more effective? And then the answer possibilities are as follows. Continuous, partial, first continuous, and then you go over with partial, or first partial, then you go over with continuous. So once again, four options. And now we're going to dive deeper into it, and I'm going to tell you which one is more effective. Also, good example with Las Vegas. So what they do, and that's kind of tricky, but I met someone that worked at one of those casinos. And what that guy told me, he got quite drunk, and the drunker he got, the more honest he got. And at some point, he told me that what they do is that if you go to a casino in Las Vegas and if you sit at the slot machine, what they do is the chair that you're sitting at, they measure how much you weigh. Why do they do that? They want to check if you are new to the slot machine. Let's say you're new to the slot machine. So you come into a casino, you sit there, and now the slot machine wants to make sure you stay there as long as possible. How do they do this? They start off with continuous rewards. So the first few times you have quite a big chance that you're going to win something. Not a lot, $1 or $2, but a lot of bells and lights and blah, blah, blah. So you have the feeling you're winning a lot. And you're like, oh, nice, nice. The continuous reward, the slot machine tries to create a connection that it's a nice slot machine, that there is something to win here. And then after a while, it goes from continuous to partial. Suddenly, you don't win anymore. And then you win a lot. And then 40 times nothing. And then the jackpot. So the most effective is to start off with continuous and then go to partial. Why? Why is partial so effective? Well, because it resists extinction. And extinction we already saw. That's when an effect disappears. And what did they mean with this? Well, if I go to a vending machine with a can of Coke, continuous reward, and if I throw in €1 and it doesn't give me a can of Coke back, I throw in another euro, still no can of Coke. I'm going to think the machine is broken. I'm going to walk away. So the effect gets extinct. At the slot machine, if I don't get anything, I don't think the machine is broken. I think, is it still coming? Is that jackpot still coming? Because the reward is partial. I never know if it's still going to come, yes or no. So that's why. So the takeaway message, you start with continuous, then you turn it into partial because that resists extinction the best. Is that clear? Can I see yes or no in the chat? Okay, good. All right, all right, all right. Well, enough fun. Let's talk about child abuse. So we talked about rewards. Now we're going to talk about punishment. Like I told you, positive, negative, very important. Positive is about applying. PP, positive, apply. And negative is about taking something away. Punishment is never chill. A reward is always good. Punishment is never good. So what's a positive punishment? Let's say I'm a terrible parent and I have a kid and I don't like my kid and I want to punish it. A positive punishment is applying something. So let's say I give the kid like a headbutt. I quite literally apply something and it's a punishment. I mean, the kid doesn't like it, right? Same when I hit my kid. Positive, I apply something. It's not very chill. A negative punishment, negative taking something away. A punishment, the result should not be nice. A little bit more ethical, taking away the kid's phone. Negative, taking away. The result, the kid doesn't like it. Still punishment. Okay. Luckily, for all kids in the world, punishment is not very effective. And you have to know on your exam, they're gonna ask you, that's the most common question. They're gonna ask you like, okay, what is not a reason that punishment is ineffective? So they're gonna give you A, B, C, and it's gonna be one of those, and then one answer possibility that is kind of logical, but just doesn't belong here. Okay? And I'm gonna walk you through all of them so that you really remember those. But that is how it's often examined. So let's start with the first reason. Why is punishment not effective? It is because intensity of the punishment has to increase for it to be effective. So how dark that might sound, if I headbutt my kid, if I do that the same time over and over again in the same way, at some point the kid is going to get used to it, is not going to be afraid anymore, and then the punishment doesn't work. So I have to headbutt like harder and harder every every single time. I always have to think about this part that it's good that I live alone, that it doesn't sound like I'm teaching you how to abuse your child. But I do think it's an effective way to remember it. But you have to do it harder and harder to get the same effect. And that's a problem. That's also why child abuse often escalates and becomes more intense. Second one is time interval. Another example, let's say I have a puppy and my puppy pees on the carpet. Then some people feel they have to take the puppy and rub its face in its own pee to learn that it shouldn't be doing that. It's nice to see that in your faces you have more empathy for the puppy than for the kid, but that's more about you than about yeah than about the example. But basically, the reason that it doesn't work is because you have to be very quick with the punishment in order to make it effective. About with a dog, it's about 3 seconds. With a human, it's about 11 seconds to create an emotional connection between the wrong behavior, being on the carpet, and the punishment that you're going to get. So if I see that my dog pees, if I have to get up from the couch, I'm already too late. So I have to walk behind my dog the entire day to then make the punishment effective. So you have to be very quick with your punishment. That's the takeaway here. Consistency of punishment, not to be confused with intensity. The punishment has to be more intense, but the kind of punishment, consistency, kind of punishment, has to stay the same. So, why is this a problem? Well, let's take the ethical example of taking away the phone of my kid. I can do that once, maybe twice if you're a very social kid or if your kid has an affair. But at some point, your kid doesn't have phones anymore. And then you don't have a punishment anymore. I see a question. Are there a lot of questions with double negation? Yeah, quite a few. So just like you just said, what is not a reason that the punishment is not very effective? Yeah, they have that quite a bit. They're not gonna confuse you on purpose. They are not gonna make it like that like an exam to really see if you can read. But in this case, yeah, they tend to have that because punishment is not very effective. So then they're gonna ask you what is not a reason that it's ineffective. So do make sure to really read carefully. Yeah. Because if they feel that that's a good way to ask it, they will. They're not going to bully you on purpose, but they're also not going to go out of the way of it if they feel that's the best way to examine your knowledge. Okay. Fourth one, a little bit of a sad one. A friend of mine, she works for the Kindertelefoon, and that's like a Dutch association where kids can phone to, can call to, if they are being abused. And when kids call, at some point, the employee of the Kindertelefoon has to ask them, like, okay, well, have you maybe thought about actually, telling us who you are and where you live so we can come and help you? 9 out of 10 cases, the kid hangs up the phone at that point. Why? Well, this is a bit sad, but kids that are being abused are also quite often kids that are being neglected by their parents. So once you kind of threaten that you might take them away from their parents, what they essentially say, these kids, is it's terrible that I'm being punched by my parents, but it's also the only time I get with them. So they associate the punishment of being hit with the reward of attention. And then obviously the reward of the punishment of being hit doesn't really work because how crazy it sounds, they kind of like it because at least it's attention. Okay? Sad emoji to display my emotions to you. Avoiding and being sneaky. Who of you has brothers or sisters? Can you say yes or no in the chat? Might be relatable if you have some. It's also interesting because I also teach the Dutch course. And for Dutch people, it's about 70% yes, 30% no. For internationals, almost everyone has that, but it's a declining birth rate. It's interesting to see. But yeah, I also have brothers and sisters. Me and my brother, we used to fight a lot. And then my parents, at some point, they told us like, no, now we don't want you to fight anymore. So I don't mind who started it, but you are both are going to get in trouble if someone of you fights. And then my brother and I, we were a little bit like, yeah, we are brothers, so we have to make each other's lives miserable. That's your duty as a brother. So what we did instead is that we created like a fake language. So before we would go to dinner, my brother would walk up to me and he would say, I made a new word. Frunky was a made-up word. And he said, yeah, Frunky means that you're an idiot because your friends are also idiots. And I was younger, so I thought, okay, nice, new word. And then we would be sitting at the dinner table and then he would smile at me and he would say, Frunky. And then, I would know what it means. My parents wouldn't. They even thought, are they finally becoming friends? They have the secret language that we can know about. But that is exactly what the fifth example is about, is that punishment learns kids in some way not to change their behavior, but actually to avoid the punishment and being sneaky, to just hide their real behavior and still make each other's life miserable without actually changing and being nicer to each other. Okay. Are these five reasons clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? Actually, I see a question. Can you explain the consistency again? Absolutely no problem. The consistency is about that the kind of punishment has to stay the same. So if I have a kid that is annoying, I can't sometimes hit it, then punch it, then take away its phone. The kind of punishment has to stay the same. Because otherwise, you want to create a connection between, let's say, I hit my kid when he cries, that crying means I get hit. Crying is getting hit. Crying is getting hit. If I say, when you cry, sometimes you get hit, sometimes I take away your phone, sometimes I scream at you, the connection becomes less. And then, well, the punishment is less effective. Does that make sense? So those are the reasons that punishment is ineffective. Yeah, how you have to understand it is that in order for punishment to be effective, to make it work, you have to take all of these things into account. And that's very difficult. So if you, in theory, the intensity would increase, your time interval would be on point, the consistency is the same, you can tackle this and can tackle this, then punishment can be effective. But that's so difficult that generally punishment is not effective. So consistency makes it effective? Correct. Yes. In order for it to be effective, you have to tackle all of these conditions. And that almost never happens. So that's why it doesn't work as well as being rewarded. Does that make sense? Make it more clear for you all? Okay, perfect. Good that you ask.
I have a question. Just you said all of these are the reason that a punishment is effective.
Yeah, like the general conclusion that you have to remember for your exam is that punishment is not effective. And the reason why it's not effective is it because it has to meet all of these criteria in order to make it effective. And that's just very difficult.
What could be an example of not effective punishment?
Of a not effective punishment.
Yeah, like if the question is what is not a reason that a punishment is not effective?
Oh, so what would be one of the fake reasons you
Yeah.
asked? Yeah, one of the fake reasons could be, for example, one that they really like to ask is that they say that children don't have the emotional capacity to connect a punishment with the behavior. Something like that, which sounds logical somewhat. And that's once again one of these questions where they want to check, are you just thinking logically or do you really know your stuff? So it's going to be one of like one fake reason like that. So you have to be able to recognize those. Yeah,
Thank you.
no worries. Okay, enough about child abuse. Let's continue with animal abuse. Also a great party starter. Escape conditioning. What do we have here? I see a question. I'm gonna discuss it. I'm gonna answer it like after this slide. Escape conditioning. We put a dog in a box. This is an experiment you have to know. We put a dog in a box. That's classic already. And you give the dog a shock. What happens? The dog jumps to the other side because it wants to get away from the shock. And here it does not get a shock. Okay. However, what we see, even although the dog is safe here from the shock, it still wants to escape. It still is running. This is like a treadmill. So it still wants to run away. This is what we call escape conditioning. It's a very strong phenomenon that's important to know. And basically, how it works is well, I give it a shock here, it escapes, and I kind of learn it that escaping is good. You have to escape. So, although it's safe here, it still wants to escape just to be sure, just to avoid the shock. It wants to keep running. Escape conditioning. Okay. Now, Well, obviously this is a little bit cruel to the dog, but the scientists said, we are very small, very smart scientists. We can surely come up with a way to make it even more shitty for the dog. And they did. So they put the dog back in the box. They gave it a shock again. The dog jumps to the other side. And this is an important aspect for the exam because once again, this is also applicable in real life. You give it a shock. The dog is like, well, I know what to do. I just escape to this side because this side is safe. But now you also give it a shock here. And they wanted to see what does the dog do? Does it want to go back? Does it start barking? Does it keep running? No. None of those. What the dog did is just lie down and just whimped, cried a little bit, and accepted the shocks for what it is. And this is the concept of learned helplessness. Basically, what you taught the dog is that, well, this used to be your safe place. It's not safe anymore. And the dog kind of becomes hopeless and feels, well, this is it. This is my life now. And just accepts it like that. Why is this specifically important for your exam? It's because this phenomena is also viewed in depression. So if you look at the DSM-5, which categorizes well, disorders and mental instability, learned helplessness is a very big condition for depression. So with COVID, to take that example, a lot of people might be on the edge of depression, but they had that one friend, that one little safe spot. And then once that is taken away, everything feels like pain and everything feels like a shock. And people end up in a depression. It's not that they're going to look for sports or something else. No, they give up. And that kind of idea of it's not going to get better. This is my life now. This is just endless pain. That is one of the key criteria of depression. So that's why learned helplessness is an important aspect to understand. I see a question. What about the fact that punishment does not make clear to the subject which behavior they should be performing instead of the punished behavior? Very good point. That is basically what is in this one. So indeed, because a kid doesn't understand that I didn't understand that I just have to be nice to my brother because it's nice to be nice. I just thought I have to skip this, I have to avoid this so that I can still do it. So indeed, that is very much one reason, but that is kind of the fifth reason. But yeah, very good. That is the underlying reason of this, and that's why, because kids don't get that, they are gonna be avoiding the punishment. What is an example of a question that they could ask about this? It could be that they ask you about a specific experiment. So they tell you like, okay, well, in the experiment about escape conditioning, well, at some point, I decided to put the dog back in the box and now gave it a shock on both sides. What was the result and how do we call this? And then they say, for example, it wants to escape, and we call this escape conditioning. Well, no, if it's the second time, then we call it learned helplessness. And what it does is that it accepts the shocks. So you have to know the specific experiment. Are the exams generally considered hard or are they doable? Like you have to study really well to just pass or very good question. The boring answer is it depends really from course to course. Generally, experimental psychology is considered quite difficult because it's quite detailed. And I think one of the reasons, and especially the Dutch lecturer really emphasizes, he always says everything is on the slides. You just have to know the slides, blah, blah, blah. And what that then means is that people are going to only study the slides, but they don't understand that it's about the broader context. So if they talk about ganglion cells on the slides, it doesn't mean that you just have to understand the one sentence that's written about ganglion cells on the cells. You have to understand the explanation behind it, and you have to know it in quite some detail. So you have to really understand the concept. So that's why a lot of people go into, yeah, we say in Dutch, go into the mist. I'm not sure if this is an expression, but that they make the mistake of learning it too superficially. So in the end, I'm also gonna give some advice on how I would tell that's the best way to study, how I did it. And like I said, I've been teaching this since 2016, so I've seen a lot of students in which I think you are most safe. And I would say, well, better safe then sorry, especially for your first period. It's better to overstudy and notice, hey, that's what I did. I overstudied a little bit and I got like a 9.5 and a 9 for my first period. And I thought, okay, I maybe overdid it a little bit, but I saw a lot of my fellow students underdo it. And then you're immediately behind. And that's just fucked up, to put it bluntly, because this is also a basis for further subjects. Brain and behavior, neurological subjects you're going to get. Experimental psychology is the basis for that. How many questions do you have to have right to pass? They change that a little bit yearly, so I don't dare to say that right now. Usually it's somewhere between 38 and 42 out of the 50. But if someone knows it exactly, they change it a little bit because one year the exam rate, the pass rate is really high, and then they're gonna make it more difficult. And sometimes the exam rate is really low, and I'm gonna make it more easy, and they're gonna tweak a little bit. 34. Okay, so that's quite flexible for y'all. Yeah. Okay. And let me see. Okay. In the meantime, for the people that want to take a break, you can take a break. You can also join the experimental psychology group chat. We're gonna take a break until, let's see what time it is. Let's say 5 over 4. Um, But if we study the slides and reach the pages the professor recommends to read, it should cover all the material for the exam. No, generally it covers a lot, but in my experience, not all. So what's also very interesting is that the Dutch lecturer says something different than the English lecturer. Because the Dutch lecturer says, well, by just studying the slides, you don't know everything. You really have to also study the book. And now the interesting part is you guys are going to get the same exam as the Dutch people. So it's odd. So and that's also my experience. Don't understudy, try to overstudy, and really know your stuff. Okay? So it's possible to pass the exam without reading the book at all. I passed the exam with a 9.5 without reading the book. Yeah, indeed. I didn't read the book at all. I have it still right here. I didn't read it at all. No, no. But to be fair, I didn't just study the slides. So I am a little bit hyper, as you might know, like a little bit jumpy. I have to I have to hear content. So I followed an exam training, and that is what I needed in order to hear the content and immediately be able to ask my questions. And I studied the summary that comes with it. And out of the summary that comes with it, I made a little mini summary, and then a mini summary, and I made so many small summaries with it. And that is the way how I passed. But I didn't read the book. No. So the book is no necessity. So that's an important nuance. You don't have to read the book, but try to be a little bit more extensive than only following the slides. That's what I would advise. He also specified how many questions per chapter there will be. Exactly, that's right here. That's this one. If you have any questions, you can say it in the chat. I'm going to get some water, and then I'm going to be back in 5 minutes, but you can already ask your questions. And then we're going to go a little bit more into detail, show you some more exam questions. So see you in a bit. Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, good afternoon. See some questions. Can you explain what things are important for us to memorize versus to only understand the overall ID? Yes, I will go a little bit more into that in the end because then I can also discuss, make sure that we can discuss everything today. But it really depends indeed from topic to topic. Um, so this gives some indication of that. Um, but don't underestimate the amount of detail because that's what a lot of people make a mistake in. I heard that a lot of Dutch and Belgian schools use a system for exams that tries to eliminate the chance for us to guess by taking away points with every wrong answer. So you have to leave the question unanswered if you don't know it. No, that's not the case. Now, always fill in an answer. If you don't fill in an answer, it's automatically wrong. So it's never strategically wise to not fill in an answer. I do get the question. I know that some schools do that. Tilburg doesn't do that. Do you discuss a different topic on Monday? No, it's going to be the same topic. So, how do you know which questions will be an exam? No hate. No hate. Nice. Well, the reason that we know that is because we've been analyzing the exam since 2012. So to create some ID, what we've been doing, this is also, by the way, why sometimes university doesn't like us that much, is that we make summaries with a team, and those are partially older students, but also students within your year. So within your first year, we have students that help us. They attend the lectures, and for example, it could be that your lecturer all of a sudden this year says the entire exam is going to be about the ear, something like that, something ridiculous like that. That's important for us to know. So then we're gonna change the summary based on that. Those same students, so within your year, they're gonna make the exam, and they, after the exam, immediately tell us what questions came in there and what questions didn't. And I've seen the exams over the last like years since I did this since 2016. So I just ask them, did this question came in? This question, this question, this question. They say yes, yes, no, this one, no, yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no. And that way we see that some questions come back there every year. The university doesn't particularly like that because, and I can imagine, because, well, they say we want to see if people understand experimental psychology. My goal, our incentive is to make sure that people pass the exam. And we say, well, if you don't change the exam, then we are going to tell students that this is going to be the question that you get asked on the exam. So that is a little bit of a different incentive, and sometimes that's why it kind of conflicts. Also, reason is, and this was specifically by Tilburg Law the case, that students stopped coming to the lectures, stopped buying the books because they attended the trainings and bought summaries. And you have to understand, because that might seem a little bit like small, but for experimental psychology, the same thing is happening in psychology now. And they change the book edition every year a little bit so that people have to buy the books again. And the book is about 100 euros, something like that. You and the Dutch track together are about 800 students. That's 80,000 euros just for experimental psychology every year that they are missing if people stop buying books and start reading summaries or use the PDF from last year. And that has become a problem. And that is also why, because we are the only and the biggest organization that do this, that we get a little bit of bashing every now and then. But the amount of students that follow it increases every year. So that's a good sign. So we're doing something well, but that is indeed kind of a thing that we have to battle against every single year. But that's also why we do things for free, so that you can make up your own mind, you're smart people. So that's it. Will this be enough to know for the exam? Yeah, the thing that we're going to be discussing today, obviously not the entire exam, but this chapter, yes. Yeah, you will. That's the goal of today, that you won't make any mistakes on this chapter. This lesson is going to finish at 4:30. It might continue a little bit, but if you have to leave at 4:30, we can leave at 4:30. A lot of questions. Is really everything covered in the full training? Yes, everything is covered in the full training. Yeah, everything. Are there going to be graphics for us to describe in the exam, like pictures of the brain? No, not so much. No, I'm going to show you a question later, but it's more about orders, so that you know light comes in through your pupils, ciliary muscles, then through your V1, etc., etc. More than that, you have to label it. But if they change the duration of the exam this year, then there's a big chance they will also change the questions, right? Very good question, but I don't think so, because the questions for experimental psychology generally are not long. So it's not that they can skip the long questions and give you shorter ones because they already are quite short. You don't get like cases. You get like quite straight to the point questions generally. Can I prepare for this year's exam with the third edition of the book instead of the fourth fan? Generally, yes. I haven't checked both, but it's almost like very small, minor details because every single time the same thing happened. Someone makes a PDF of the book, and then the university runs out of money because of that. And then they publish a new book and they change the order a little bit and change, but generally, yes. Yeah. Okay. So don't let them constantly make you buy new books. That's my advice. Okay. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the neuro part of this chapter. In the exam, it could be that they ask you what brain parts are most associated with rewards. And usually, what they will do is they say you have three options: nucleus accumbens, medial forebrain bundle, and hypothalamus, and they are all three equally important. So either they're going to ask you what is important, and then they're going to say hypothalamus and three nonsense answers. So hippocampus, for example, they sometimes like to confuse you and put hippocampus there. Then you have to know these are the three correct ones: nucleus accumbens, medial forebrain bundle, hypothalamus. The ja sound, the Dutch word for yes, is being ja. Hypothalamus. It is more like a ja sound. Hippocampus is not the one. It's the ja one. Hypothalamus, yeah, that one belongs. Okay? So don't get confused. They like to throw the hippocampus in there. Okay? Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that has everything to do with reward. So not serotonin, not oxytocin. If they ask you those, that's nonsense. Dopamine. Try to remember it. If you get a reward that feels dope. So dopamine. And then two very addictive drugs that you probably know, cocaine and heroin. You have to know for this part that they are so effective because they play directly on your dopamine. So they really activate your dopamine. So that's the reason. Okay. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? Okay, perfect. No, I see no. Okay. So the main takeaway message here is that these three parts are connected with your reward system. So if they're going to ask you, for example, what they also could ask you is which brain part is not associated with your reward system? And then they say nucleus accumbens, medial forebrain bundle, hypothalamus, and hippocampus. That's the one they put in mostly because they want to see, do you understand? Hypothalamus, yes. Hypothalamus, yeah. And hippocampus, no. So that's the thing you don't have to know how or how much all of these parts play a role. That's going to be brain and behavior later on. For now, you just have to remember these three. Okay. What is a type of question they could ask with cocaine? Usually they combine these concepts. They're not going to ask you how expensive it is or something like that. What they're going to ask you is, okay, um, cocaine, what is an effective drug and why is that effective? And then would be cocaine because it plays on serotonin, ecstasy because it plays on dopamine, cannabis because it plays on dopamine, cocaine because it plays on dopamine. So you have to be able to remember dopamine and cocaine and heroin as the two effective ones. So that's also why I put them very close to each other, so that you hopefully visually remember them like that. Okay? See a question, do you think using those like practice open-ended questions for each chapter you put on Canvas is a good way to study, or are they useless? Well, I think that any exam question, to be honest, is generally a good way to study. Because just to get it out of your mind, to be busy with content is very important. That's also why I always followed exam trainings, not per se because I wouldn't understand it, but just because I want to be active with the content. Um, and that's how I always passed. So they are not always the most representative because sometimes he just likes to ask a question that he thinks it interesting, but that's not going to be like that on the exam. But I do think it's a good way to practice a little bit. Yeah. So don't think if you're able to answer it, you're automatically able to do the exam well. That's not the case, but it is good always to practice. Okay? Okay. Do you have a list of exam questions? No, we don't have a list of exam questions because we implement them in the training and in the summary. So the moment that we would share that with everybody, then the exam questions would be everywhere. Then everyone will pass with a 9 or with a 10, and then they're gonna disqualify the exam, which has actually happened a couple of years back. That people were like really spreading everything out, and then suddenly they disqualify the exam. So yeah, that's no, we don't do that. No, didn't happen in psychology, by the way. It happened at law, but yeah. Okay, we go a little, make a nice little full circle because all the way at the beginning, I told you, does this seem, do you guys recognize this? And you said yes. And then I asked you, could you answer the question? Right? We're putting in them in the right order. It was like 50-50. Some people could, some people couldn't. First, I'm going to tell you a little memory shortcut so that you can always remember what is the correct order. Before I even explain what this is about, fisherman visits friendly vroom. So this fisherman, he visits this cute little car called vroom. Fixed interval, variable interval, fixed ratio, variable ratio. From bad to good. Okay? It's an effective way to remember it. So even if you don't understand it, because it can be difficult, this is a good way to remember it. Well, also to explain to you how it works, they made an experiment, and basically the experiment would be that you guys would be here in my room, and I would give you a big red button, and I will say press the button, and sometimes you get a reward. And then they wanted to see, create 4 different conditions, what makes people press the button, and what makes people less motivated to press the button. We're gonna start off with the very worst. We're going to start off with fixed interval. You have to understand that interval means time. So what they basically say here is that you have to press the button, but actually it doesn't matter how often you press the button because the only thing that determines if you get a reward is time. So sometimes you get a reward after 1 minute, 40 seconds, but actually it doesn't matter how often you press the button. Obviously, that doesn't make it very motivating to press the button. Then you just do it because I ask you to. So interval is always worse than ratio. Ratio is about pressing the button. The more you press the button, the more rewards you're going to get. So intervals are worse than ratio. And then one thing you have to remember is that fixed is worse than variable. Fixed means, in this case, we're talking about interval. Fixed interval means you get a reward at a fixed moment in time. So you press the button, and after every minute, you get a reward. Minute, time, and after every minute, so it's fixed. Fixed moment in time, you get a reward. This is terrible. Why? Because you get these little spikes and dips in motivation. The reason that is because you are almost at the 1 minute. So let's say I say every 1 minute you get a reward. You're like, oh, nice, 58, 59, nice, 1 minute reward. Yeah. And then it's gonna be like 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I have to do that entire minute again. And that's what you see here. You get motivated after you get the reward, and then you know, oh no, it's gonna be boring for a long time. And these peaks you don't want in your motivation because these little dips can mean that you don't want to press at all anymore, that you just stay demotivated. The most important takeaway message here is ratio is better than interval because it's nicer to have control. So the more I press the button, the more rewards. It's nicer to have that than that you just get it at time because who cares about the button then? And people like it more if it varies. So if you don't know when you're gonna get rewards, that's exciting. Than when you know when you're gonna get reward, when it's fixed. Okay? If you find this difficult to understand conceptually, I will repeat once again. Fisherman visits friendly vroom. This is from bad to good. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? It's quite a tricky topic. Okay. And I also want to like explain it conceptually, right? Because I mean, like I said, the exam analysis, every single year, the exam is almost identical. But in theory, it could be that they throw it around and they suddenly ask you something different about this. So then it's also important that you don't just know these memory shortcuts, but you also understand what it's about. Do you have an exam question for that? I absolutely do. Right here. If you're able to answer this, say yes in the chat. Don't say the answer just yet because people want to think for themselves. Okay, quite some yeses. All right. Okay. What do we see here? Least effective to most effective. Do read, eh? Because, I mean, the fisherman visits a friendly room is least effective to most effective. So you can apply it here, but if it would be the other way around, you obviously have to reverse it. Even if you find it difficult, fisherman visits friendly room. Okay? Conceptually, why was this again? Ratio, you have control. And we like control. So ratio is always better than interval. Okay. So then you already know ratio should be is better. So it can only be B and C because their ratio is at the end, right? Well, and then the only question that remains is do people like it fixed or do people like it when it varies a little bit? No, people like change. People would rather have that it varies a little bit than that it's fixed. So the correct answer is answer B. Is this clear for everybody? Can I say yes or no in the chat? Okay. Now we have discussed the majority of this chapter. So we've discussed this. Observational learning is only one slide that we're going to discuss, and it's very easy, but I'm going to discuss it nevertheless. Then I'm going to show you some exam questions to test you even more. I made some extra exam questions for you that I've solved before. But before we do that, I want to ask you if you could evaluate me. So you can give me a grade from 1 to 10. And once I have enough, I can continue. This is for my manager so that they see, okay, did he actually try his best? You have a number component, so you can give me a grade, and a text component. And I always ask you, like, if you don't think it was like a 10 or 9, be honest. You can absolutely tell me that, but also fill in then the text what I should do to improve to that. Okay, because usually I score between those 2 points, but if I now suddenly score lower than that, then I would like to know why, so that my manager doesn't think I didn't try my best. And then after that, we will do one more slide, and we will be discussing some more exam questions. And if you have any questions at all, I will once again give my phone number as well. Oh, whoop. I will give some my phone number, and you can just once I have enough responses, I will continue. Because I need enough responses, otherwise they just think that I didn't ask you. And then we will continue to the last part. And like I said, also if besides this topic, if you have any questions about exchange, honors program, anything, just let me know, okay? Because I know it can be tricky, especially you living in a new country and then starting a new study and that whole thing, like even for Dutchies, it can be overwhelming. So I can imagine that you making this step makes it even more so. And yeah, just let me know. If I don't know the answer, then I'm just going to help you by connecting you to the person that does know the answer. But you can always send me a text. Okay, let me see if I have enough responses. Let me continue to the last part. I appreciate the kind words. Let me see. Yeah, enough responses. Thank you so much. I am going to tutor for the full training. Yeah. So before we get to the last part, just to give you an idea, because I got my WhatsApp currently. I'm not sure if I can show you, but it's 859 chats, so it's quite busy. So I always include this slide just to answer like the most questions that I get in hope to make it clear so that we don't reach 1,000 before the weekend. Um, this is going to be the full course. I will teach all four groups. So some of your names I recognize. Uh, don't be panicked. If you signed up for one of these groups, you will still in one of these groups, obviously. But the group size is limited. We're not going to be with 60 people in the group. It's going to be about 20 people, 25 maybe, so that there's a lot of room for questions. So if you think I suck, then I would not advise you to sign up because you're going to be seeing me again. Um, so this is the full training. Total 120 spots. So we have about 30 spaces per group, and we are now on 103 to 120. So this was yesterday, so it might be a little bit more. Um, what if I miss a session? You can get a recording. It's no problem. You can either we will see if you can join another group, or we'll get you a recording of the session. That's no problem. How do we get the full training? I will send you the link. Um, um, is it realistic to pass the exam with a training? Well, I don't want to oversell. I want to be honest with you. So last year's about 96% of the people passed. So that's by far the majority. But out of these 96%, you have a lot of people. Some students do everything. They study the book, they study the summary, they study everything. And some people only do the full course. And the total, they pass this. But for us, it's difficult to establish because people will not always be honest about what they did. But definitely between this 96%, there are people who did nothing but the exam training and people who did everything. So it's a little bit in between, but generally I would say yes, because we're going to be discussing everything. So at least if you participate actively and also are not shy to ask me questions, it's also allowed to after the course, well, then then you know everything. So Uh, is this right? I'm not sure. I cannot open it right now, but I think it's the right one. Uh, I'm stressed as fuck. Nice. That's always good. If we don't attend the full training, can we still get the recordings and for how much? Um, well, that's best to test Esra that you probably saw in the group chat, because I think there are options there. Yeah, definitely. I think you can kind of choose. I am not the tutor for history. I am the tutor for research methodology. For history, our teacher is higher evaluated than me. So that's always with pain in my heart to say, to admit. But I can tell you that he's generally better. Difficult to admit. So you're gonna be good, is what I'm trying to say. This is a voucher, by the way. So if you want to sign up, this is like discount. So don't forget. We'll put that in the group because also we're gonna continue to the rest of the content, obviously. But just for the people asking those questions, okay? And with the full course, there's also like the full summary, by the way. So don't you don't have to buy the full summary if you already buy the full course, okay? It's included. And it's about, because that's an obvious question, 835 per hour. And there's two options, a smaller group, a smaller course, and a bigger course. Okay, like I promised you, one more slide about observational learning. This is the only thing you have to know about observational learning. We also learn by observing others. So what does a model do and what is the consequence? That's the most important part. So let's say I'm this kid, I look at my dad and he's shaving himself. Maybe I copy his behavior. And according to Albert Bandura, which is a name you have to know, otherwise I wouldn't put it on there. If I copy this behavior, yes or no, it depends on two things. The consequences for the model. So if I look at my dad, he's shaving and he cuts open his entire face, yeah, then I'm not going to copy that behavior. That is a bad consequence. And the status of the model. If I look up to my dad, I'm more inclined to follow his example. Okay. Another question that they like to ask is what emotions do we most often copy from others? And then they give four answer possibilities. They say aggression and happiness, fear and sadness, sadness and happiness, and aggression and fear. Then you have to remember it's aggression and fear. And the easiest way to remember is to know why. And that's because those two are most connected to survival. If you all smile, I might also smile, but if you all look aggressive at me, you might attack me. So I have to become aggressive as well to protect myself. That's crucial for my survival. The same goes for fear. If you all start looking very afraid now, could be that there's something dangerous behind me. So aggression and fear are the ones that are most connected to survival, to danger. And therefore we copy this the easiest. See a question, is the summary all the literature we have to know? Yes, in the summary, there's everything you have to know. I mean, obviously you have to learn actively, but if you know everything that's in the summary, you know everything for the exam. Because it's based on the slides, it's based on literature, and it's based on the past exams. Yeah. The question that you could get is that they say, what emotions are most often copied from others? And then you have to know it's aggression and fear. Those two are the most copied. Not happiness, not sadness, not surprise, but aggression and fear. Lastly, you have to know about culture, and you all know what culture is, obviously. But the thing that you have to know for the exam is that we are not the only ones that have culture. There are also animals that have culture. So chimps, elephants, dolphins. You don't have to know all the animals by heart, but the takeaway message is here. They also have culture. Okay? Now, that's all we have to know about observational learning. This we did, this we did, this we did. Now I have some more exam questions. What does the law of effect imply of Thorndike? If you think you're able to answer this, can you say yes in the chat? And if not, can you say no? Now I asked it openly again. Obviously, it's not going to be like that in the exam. I've noticed that quite some people forget. Not because it's difficult, but because it's so obvious that you kind of think like, yeah, I get this, and then you continue. The law of effect was the example with tying my own shoelaces. So behavior with positive consequences is repeated more quickly and more efficiently. Okay? I got €1 every single time I tie my shoelaces. So yeah. Okay, one more question. I accidentally showed the answer already, so I hope you didn't see that. Who has become known for further developing the theory of operant conditioning? And you can just say it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. Exactly. Skinner. That's absolutely correct. Pavlov classical conditioning, which is dog. Bandura is learning by observation. And Thorndike is the law of effect, which is the underlying theory of operant conditioning. But this is about further developing, and that's Skinner. Well done. Then I'll give you one more bonus question. Actually, we are done for today for the time, but I want to make sure that you are prepared as well as possible for the exam. This isn't a very important exam question. We didn't discuss this today, but see if you will be able to answer this. I see a question in the meantime. Are there questions where multiple answers are correct? No. No. Always go for one answer. If you fill in more than one answer, automatically you have it wrong in the exam. If you feel that multiple answers are correct, go to the exam inspection and fight your ass off. Because sometimes you are right. For example, I got with the question about the hypothalamus and the hippocampus, when I was doing my exam, the question is what brain part is not connected with rewards? And I had it wrong. I said the hypothalamus and it was the hippocampus. But then I went to the exam inspection and I said, and that's why they changed the question now. Um, Almost all brain regions are somewhat responsible for everything because they all interact. So I said, yeah, but it says nothing and it has something. And then they gave me the points. And then they changed it. I said what's least connected. But yeah, definitely go to the exam inspection. Can you guys say yes or no if you think you would be able to answer this question? Nice. Okay. A little bit of a mix. These are kind of, this is an exam question that you're going to expect. And the same goes for the eye. Okay, I will walk you through it, and then I'm gonna be leaving because I have to teach again at 4:45. But I think this is important, so we're gonna do this. Structure of the ear. Do it like this. Okay, you have to know the order very much. To answer the question I got before, do you have to label a lot? No. But they are gonna ask you about the order of things. So we're gonna start. Sound is vibrating air, as you well know. It comes into your pinna. Okay, so your pinna is always the first thing. So, to go back to the question, that means that A, B, and C could be correct. But it doesn't mean that C is automatically incorrect, because it could be that you just start further into the ear and that the order itself is still correct. Okay? So don't be confused by that. So all answer possibilities could be correct at this point. There we go again. We have the ear canal. So this is the canal through which the sound travels. And then we come at your eardrum. And this is a little fiber thingy that just because the sound is shaking, it's shaking molecules, shaking air. So the eardrum starts to shake as well. That's how it does. Then we go to your middle ear. And here, the shaking air from your eardrum is now in your middle ear. You have to understand that this sound has to travel all the way to your brain. And in order for it to make sure that it does so, it has to be louder. So they're going to make it louder with the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. And those are three little bones called the ossicles. And they're going to drum even harder to make the sound louder. You have to know all of these terms. So you have to know they are called ossicles. That's the overall term. O. Okay? Overall term is ossicles. It's three little bones. They are called the hammer, the anvil, and stirrup. And little abbreviation to remember this, the average student has this in their knowledge. Has. H-A-S. Most people know this, but most people miss this. The Latin names. Malleus, Incus, Stapes. Stapes. So the average student has this knowledge, but misses this knowledge. So if you understand has and miss, you can connect those terms. These ones are more important, hammer, anvil, stirrup, but I've seen that they sometimes ask this. So to answer your question, Robin, generally they don't ask. So I wouldn't say really learn them out of the top of your mind. They're not going to ask you, is it Malleus, Monius, Milias, or Malleus? They're not going to be like that. But it could be that they suddenly, like this question, that they suddenly remove hammer, anvil, stirrup for this. And then you have to be able to recognize it. And if they, and I've never seen it, but just to make sure you know it, if they want you to connect the English term with the Latin term, has, H-A-S, miss, M-I-S. And then you can say, so this is the same, this is the same, and this is the same. Okay? So I would say don't read or don't learn it really by heart, but if you learn this way, then at least you have it correct. Would they put it in the wrong order with the Latin terms? Could be, but then you can still connect H with M, A with I, and S with S, because it has and miss. So it could be that they say it the other way around. Yeah. But you don't have to know in your middle ear if it's first the hammer, then the anvil, then the stirrup. You don't have to know that. You just have to know that they work together. Okay. So this is your middle ear. And now it reaches your oval window. And your oval window is the same, works the same way as your eardrum. So it's a little fiber and it starts shaking because there is air against it. So it goes tick, 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 tick. And now the important thing comes here. This is your middle ear, oval window. And behind the oval window, your inner ear starts. Your cochlea, the little snail house. That's your cochlea. And in this cochlea, there is a liquid. And because the oval window is shaking, the liquid starts shaking in your cochlea. Why is this important? Well, there is a specific part in your cochlea, so shaking, cochlea, at the bottom of your cochlea. And this is called the basilar membrane. And this is crucial. If you have damage here, you're going to be deaf. Because on this basilar membrane, which is basically the bottom of the cochlea, basilar bottom, there are little hairs. And the liquid makes those hairs, because the liquid goes like this, so those hairs go like against the bottom of the cochlea, against the basilar membrane, and those hairs are your receptor cells. They send a signal to your brain. So that's the correct order. So the basilar membrane is at the bottom of your cochlea, BB, and that's the part that's closest to your brain, BBB. Okay? So we go back to the initial question. So that only leaves this as the right order. The pinna. Then we go to the Malleus, Incus, and Stapes. And obviously, in between is the ear canal and the eardrum, but they are not included. So this order is still correct. Then we go to the oval window, which is on the edge of the middle ear and the inner ear. And after that is the cochlea. So why is this not correct? Well, the basilar membrane is all the way at the end, closest to your brain, BB. That also means that you can automatically say this is not correct because it's closest to the brain, which also means you can say this is not correct, closest to the brain. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? I see a question. How often will we practice like this in the full training? Quite a bit. Yeah. You have two different kind of trainings, which is good to know for each subject. And you can decide which one works best for you. So we have one, which is basically like this, but then everything discussed, which is theory and practicing in between. That's the shorter version. We also have one longer version. That's going to be that. So everything you need to discuss with practicing in between, plus 3.5 hours of practicing only with exam questions all the way at the end. So it really depends on what you like. So generally, it's best obviously to do both, but the shorter version, you get they charge €8 something per hour, so that's going to be cheaper. So it really depends on what you personally like. But we also made they also made a possibility that since this year that you can also pay in parts or pay after you had the course, I think. So if you want to follow it, but if student life, I know the life, you can also choose to do that. And you don't get charged extra for that, obviously. It's just like a free service. That's about it. Let me see. Do I have anything more for y'all? No, that's it. So I'm gonna stay here. If you have any more questions, let me know. Uh, yeah, yeah. Well, we can do this if you want. If people want to stick around to practice a little bit, I will just do this with you guys. For each of the following examples, choose the relevant positive, negative, reinforcement, punishment. How did we do this? Positive is about applying, PP. Negative about something away. So we're going to start off with that. I would recommend that. Start with positive, negative. Before you even look what they are actually saying. I headbutt my toddler. That's positive. I add something. I apply. I take away my toddler's phone. Negative. I take a lit cigarette off my toddler's head. Not the most ethical punishment around. But negative. I take something away. I give my toddler chocolate. Positive. Now the question is, are we talking about a reward or a punishment? Just look at the result. Don't read too quickly, but look at the result of what I'm doing. I headbutt my toddler, doesn't like it. Punishment. Positive punishment. I take away my toddler's phone, doesn't like it that I take away his phone. Negative punishment. I take a lit cigarette, sounds like a punishment, but off my toddler's head, I remove it. It probably likes the fact that it's being removed. So this is a reward. I give my toddler chocolate, reward. Okay? Think for yourself. That's going to be the last question, and we're done for today. Can you think of two reasons why punishment is not effective? And you can just throw them in the chat. And if you don't want to see the answers, don't look at the chat. But just see if you are able to remember. There were five. If you're able to remember at least two of them. Yeah. In the meantime, I'll already go to the slide so you can see them again. Why is punishment not effective? Must see correct answers. Well, then that's also how I would recommend for you to study, eh? To really think out of your mind, out of your head for the things, to not just learn passively, but to put your summary away, think and try to see if you can recall it, because that's the skill you're going to need on the exam. Not that you understand it when you read it. You have to recall. Generally, by the way, because I got also questions about how to study for to history and psychology, blah, 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 and methodology. Generally, what I've seen, and I've been teaching since 2016, and I also did this myself, I advise the 3 out of 4 method. So before I go to the answer of the question that I just asked, 3 out of 4. That means you have 4 main ways of how people study. And I advise you to always choose at least 3 out of these 4. You don't have to do everything, that's overkill. Also, don't understudy. And basically, what you have is the lectures, the book, the summary. Either you make it yourself or you buy it from like a proper organization, or an exam training. Those are the 4 methods. And I advise you for each of these courses that you want to do, choose 3 out of 4, and then you're going to be fine. So for social psychology, for example, you're going to get that later. I loved that course. I did the lectures, I read the book, I made my own summary, and I passed with a 9. I didn't use a training, and I was fine. Might not be the wisest thing to tell because I'm work here, but that's the honest truth. However, I suck a little bit at statistics, and I was also not so good at biology. So for those courses, I would, based because I didn't have a lot of time, I skipped the book, followed the lecture, followed an exam training. You gotta get a summary with that, and I also passed that. Experimental psychology, I passed with a 9.5, and I didn't have biology in high school because I did it like that. And then out of the summary that you get, what I did is everything I didn't understand, made it like a smaller summary of it. I already told you, smaller summary, wrote down everything I didn't understand, asked that to my tutor, so that would be me then for you. And then if I then would understand it, I would understand it and make a little summary until you have like a few things you don't understand. Can you quickly show the ear structure slide again? Absolutely. But first, I'm going to tell you these ones. Why is punishment not effective? Intensity has to increase. I have to hit my child harder and harder. Time interval, I have to be very quickly. Consistency of punishment, the kind of punishment has to stay the same, right? So I cannot take away the phone of my kid 20 times. So it's a problem. Kids might associate the punishment with reward. They don't like to be hit, but they also get attention if they're gonna get hit. So it's a problem. And the Funky example, kids are gonna be innovative and try to avoid the punishment instead of actually changing their behavior. I will first show the structure. You're also going to get the slides, by the way, obviously. I'm going to give you the slides. This is the breakdown of the topics. So that's this. And this is this one, you mean the ear structure slide. That's this one. Yeah. Okay. If you have any more questions, like I told you, can be about anything, send me a text. counts for your entire bachelor, your entire life for that matter. If you're 70 years old, ring me up and tell me how, how to raise your kids or grandkids at that point, I assume. You can ask me anything. I'm going to try to help as good as I can. Can be about this course, can be about the entire university, about following careers. If you ever want to become a teacher, it's also you're more than welcome. If you have a good grade, more than welcome. It's fun to do. I like to do it, and it earns quite well. It's like 30 euros per hour. It's quite nice. Good student job in that sense. So I would you can always ask me questions about anything. Like I said, exchange, honors program, excellence program I didn't do, but I can still try to help you with what the difference is. And like I said, the 3 out of 4 method, I graduated cum laude with a GPA of about 8.6. And I read the book, I think only for 2 courses in my entire bachelor. So it's not needed, but also don't understudy. That's my general advice. And be nice to people. That's also a general advice. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot. And I'm happy to see that it helped. And like I said, if you have any questions, save my number and more than happy to help you. And most of you I'm going to see at the full course. So see you there. But also, if you didn't book the full course, if you have any questions, like I told you, my love is unconditional. So I'm going to help you out. See you guys. Have a good one. Enjoy your weekend. See ya.